We'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you everyone for being here today. I want to let you know that this webinar is recorded. We do have a lot of registrants that will probably be watching this afterwards. So I want to make sure that you are aware of that. And then the other thing I want to mention too is that in the chat section there, you can always send me messages. So one advantage of being here today is that, if you have any particular questions that's burning and you want us to address, I'd be happy to, especially if you can send in the chat message. And as I go through the webinar, I can look at them and address them as appropriate. With that, my name is Hai, co-founder of Affluence, which is the company behind Matrix. And this webinar is actually different from some of the other webinars that we've been doing recently. Today's focus is really on personal success. And it's something that it inspired me recently because at the end of the day, many of you here, when you think about using software, when you're using something like Matrix, what you're really trying to do is achieve personal success. I know that, we're trying to make our organization more effective. We're trying to do things better, save costs, etc. But at the end of the day, it's really about the individual, about the people, about you. And so this webinar is really about how do you help the individual, right? And we're not talking about teams and all that, achieve personal success. And so the webinar structure is slightly differently. We will go through the basics of Matrix. We will walk through the software a little bit, but I hope that this conversation is helpful for you to understand how you can use it for yourself. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the challenges that I see when we think about the individual. And I think the biggest challenge is always understanding what's priority right now. You've heard the terms, if everything's important and urgent, then nothing is important and urgent, right? And so what really matters then is that if we look at the bigger picture, what are the things that we really should be focusing our time and attention to? And the most interesting thing is that a lot of the work that we do does not always work towards the goals that matter most. Your inbox is not your to-do list. And that's actually a phrase that I think people don't really reflect on enough. And every single day you're getting so many emails, so many messages, your inbox is building up bigger and bigger. That is not your to-do list. Your inbox is just the intake. From there, you have to decide what to really work on. And then from those things that you can work on, what are the things that really matters? And so just because you can work on it doesn't mean you should work on it. And that's, to me, is very philosophical, but at the same time is so important in the bigger picture of things. And then thirdly, we're getting overwhelmed in so many different ways, by messages, by communications, by emails, by chat, and even by task inside Matrix itself. And so this is a problem that's universal in my mind. I have never seen someone who does not have one of these three challenges. And so I think that if this resonates with you, I think that's one of those things that I hope we can address and we can show you how to tackle some of these challenges using Matrix. So what is Matrix? Matrix is a software at the end of the day that helps you manage emails, priorities, and projects. And one of the things we do that is to ensure that you conduct more efficient meetings, that you really understand the real-time status of what really matters. So how does Matrix tackle those three problems that I mentioned? First, we use something called the 4-quadrant methodology to set really clear priorities, and we'll dig into the philosophy behind that. And then second, I want to show you some of our latest AI capabilities to help you achieve your goals, your personal goals that you have today. And then finally, showing you how Matrix work with your workflow rather than interrupt it, because I think that's how we can actually tackle each of these problems that we've talked about. So what makes Matrix different? It's the only project email and meeting management software that is Microsoft 365 security certified in Microsoft Teams, in Outlook, and web at the same time. And we're leveraging AI capabilities to help you achieve goals in particular. And so we're really excited about that. And then we also provide what's called a very people-centric collaboration. So it's not just about projects, it's really about people, right? When you do something, you're doing it for somebody. There's always sort of a recipient on the other side. And so if you think about that, what we strive to do is help you understand what you need to work on for anyone else. And then finally, Party Matrix is available as a SaaS standard solution, a HIPAA compliant solution, an Azure government cloud solution, and then manage private Azure deployments. If any of these enterprise capabilities interest you, feel free to reach out to us. We won't be covering that in details today. So going back to the philosophy behind Party Matrix, there's a famous quote attributed to President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." The idea being that every day we think about, again, the inbox, the emails that you get, you're getting things that are coming in and that's pulling you away from the work that you actually need to do. But realistically, if you look at those emails, the vast majority of them are not important. And so they seem urgent, and that urgency is what pulls us away from working on things that are truly important. If you just close your eyes and think about, hey, what can I do to actually make my life better, or my my organization better in 1 year, in 3 years, in 5 years, I almost guarantee that none of those things, those action items that you have to do, came in your inbox this morning, right? And so that's the difference between urgency and importance. So one of the things I always like to do is I like to ask people to think about their quote to-do list. So imagine you took out a piece of paper right now and started writing down everything you have to do. And so you have the top, you have the bottom. And so as that list builds up, if you have 5 things to do, that's pretty easy. You're like, okay, I'll go through this list. I'll start somewhere and I'll get it done. But if you have 20 things, what do you work on? Do you work on the things at the top, or do you work on the things at the bottom? And then if you need to add something, do you add at the top or do you add at the bottom? And then the other question I have for you is, when you wrote that list down, how did you write that list down? Did you write it down because something was due? Or is that list actually sorted by importance? And the answer is typically never by importance, because it's whatever top of mind. And top of mind was always tied back to urgency. So now what I ask you to do next is take that list that you have and start putting into this 2x2 matrix. So imagine the things that are actually really critical, the things you have to get done, but it's due right now or due very soon. That's quadrant 1. That's the due now. And then the things that are critical, but you don't have to do them yet, that's the things you plan for. And then what are the things you can delegate or outsource? And so when we talk about delegate, it doesn't just mean that you have to have someone who's a direct report or anything along those lines, but it's just about leveraging some other resource out there that can tackle those problems. I mean, that's the reason why we go to restaurants, right? We want to delegate that cooking, that cleaning to somebody else. And so you can think of delegate as a way to get someone else who's better at their job to do that job for you. And so then you can focus on the quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. And then finally, so you have the inbox. So one thing that's really fascinating is, if you're doing this exercise right now, my take is, you may have a lot of things in quadrant 1. You have a lot of things that's been sort of building up in terms of the priorities and so forth. But as you use Party Matrix more and more, hopefully what will happen is that your quadrant 1 will get smaller and smaller, because as you tackle them, they're out of the way. And then the question is, what do you work on next? You should always be working on quadrant 2. So if you're doing a great job using Party Matrix, your quadrant 2 is where all the action's at, because that's where you're planning for the future. You're thinking ahead, as opposed to fighting fires in quadrant 1. And that's not something that's very obvious, but it was, brought to my attention in a really deep conversation with a customer. And he was so good at communicating that, hey, why am I constantly firefighting? That it made me realize how important it is to emphasize that part. So keep that in mind. Look at your action item list. And then turn them into these different buckets, put them in different buckets, and see where you're spending your time and whether or not you're really working on the things that matter. When we talk about team collaboration, that's when I ask you to take this same list and walk around the office and compare notes. But from the perspective of from the personal perspective, what you're really doing is you're looking at this list, right? And no, now it's no longer a list. It's a matrix. You're looking at this matrix and you're realizing, okay, you know what? These are the things I need to work on to further my goal. So the 4-quadrant method, which is called the Eisenhower matrix, is very, very useful, but the hardest part is around fitting things into those buckets. And this is where you might want to push back on me. You're like, you know what? I have this list. I don't know which quadrant they belong in. It's so hard. Why can't I just procrastinate? Why can't I just leave it later? I just want it in the list. Why can't I just do that? And the answer is that's the reason why you do something like this. It's because half the battle is in determining what you need to do and then what you shouldn't do. So success from Party Matrix really isn't about managing those tasks or getting those tasks done, or even getting something done right. The success from Party Matrix is deciding on the right things to do. If you do the right things right, then that's when you've achieved success. Then you're spending your time most effectively and most efficiently. Doing the wrong things right is actually not that very not helpful at all. Doing the wrong things right is just a waste of time. And then, so that's something to keep in mind. It is not very obvious, but I do want to emphasize that over and over again. Now, with that, what I'm going to do is I want to remind you that one, that's our website, affluence.com. These webinars that I do, they are recorded, and we try to keep a repository of them. And then we'll also have other webinars there, so just keep that in mind. And then I also want to bring up our support address in case you have any questions or you want to follow up on any of the things that we talked about here today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the demo. I do want to remind everyone here that, again, if you look at the chat section in the webinar here, you can send me a message and I can take a look at it. And at the appropriate time, I'll try my best to address those. All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the application. I'm going to open up this here. Fantastic. So this is what Party Matrix software looks like. Now, I don't know if everyone here has had a chance to take a look at Party Matrix yet. I assume actually you do, because this is intended for users of Party Matrix. But just in case you're not so aware, what happens is Party Matrix as a software, what we do is we force you, and I use the word force on purpose, force you to prioritize the task into this matrix. And you see how I have the same categorization, the same bucket names as what I just showed you previously: the do now, the do later, the delegate, and the postpone. You can think of the postpone as sort of your inbox. And the do now and do later are actually pretty obvious based on what we just talked about. And so when you have Party Matrix, essentially what we have is we have a concept called projects. Project, you can think of it as a matrix, a list, right? Because you may have your shopping list, you may have your to-do list, you may have your work task list, you may have key initiatives that you're working on, you may have your goals. Those are all different lists. And so in Party Matrix, we call that projects. And then within that project, we have these things that we call items. Items might be tasks, items might be emails, items might be things that you're actually working on, or sub goals or something like that. So just think of that as the terminology behind all of this. So one of the things that I have here, I have a project called My Personal Priorities. Very, very easy to understand. These are the things I need to work on. So for example, so let's just say I want to go and get a YMCA membership. Okay, let's just say that's something that I'm really thinking about, and I want to get that. Now, when I create a task like that in Party Matrix, one of the things I can just do is say, do in 1 month. And so the way it works in Party Matrix is when we create a task, we can actually decide what bucket it belongs in, but then you also have these other dimensions you can add. So right here, for example, I have on the right-hand side what we call the item details, which is the due dates, the task name itself, who's it assigned to. When it starts, obviously it's assigned to me, but I can set reminders and effort and so forth as needed. That's not necessary. So I would argue that if you want to use Party Matrix and you want to get the most out of it, you don't, with the minimal effort, you don't have to leverage all these other metadata, extra details that you have to a task. The most important thing that you want to do in Party Matrix is put the task in the appropriate quadrants, because that's all about deciding what you need to work on, and then making sure that every task has a due date. So that's something to consider. Now, this is the basis behind the quadrants. So now let me show you around goal setting. Because one of the things I mentioned to you was how Party Matrix leverages AI to help you achieve personal success. So as an example, let's just say one thing I want you to think about today during this webinar, and maybe after this webinar, what you should be working on is think about a goal that you have. Let's just come up with an example. Let's just say you want to get a promotion to become a senior project manager and get a raise. So with Party Matrix, what we're doing is you can ask our application, or you can tell our application a goal. And what we'll try to do is we'll try to build out that action plan for you. And then after you do this, you simply click build my action plan. I actually have this already created because it does take 30 seconds or a minute or so for these projects to be created. So when you're doing this live, put in anything and let our system give you the basis for that. So let me see here. Do I have that project right here? So this was a project that was generated by our AI. And you can see here, it create a project called promotion to senior project manager and raise. So what we've just done is actually we created a matrix with low effort and high impact tasks, high effort and high impact tasks. You can think of this as the equivalent of do now, right? The low effort, high impact, that's where you should be focusing on first. That's where you, with the minimum amount of work, you can actually achieve your goal relatively quickly. The 20-80 rule applies. And then the high effort, high impact, again, is the next thing. So that's where it does require more work, but these are also the things that matter. If your goal is to get a promotion, your goal is to get a raise, these two quadrants where you need to focus your time. And then if you go lower down, these are sort of everything else. This is not even icing on the cake. This is stuff that you might want to consider, but you look at it and then you decide whether or not it belongs here or should you move it up. Now, what our system is doing is we're just generating a baseline. We're generating a starting point for you with, so then you can actually get started and actually you don't have to think so hard about it. So leverage this capability. And with that, I'm actually going to send you this link here into the chat so you can go to that page and you can play with this afterwards. But this is one of those things that we do with Matrix that is intended to help you as an individual to achieve that goal. So think about your goals. Now, one of the questions that people have is, how do I set my goal? Well, there's a concept called SMART goal. And so I'm going to show you the next thing that we have here. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevance, and time bound. So what that really means is that when you have a goal, the goal should be well defined, right? The goal should be measurable. So then you know that you've achieved it or not, or some level of achievement. So for example, you can think promotion to a senior project manager. Well, senior is itself a measurable thing, whether you're senior or staff or a junior, those are all that's measurable. And so achievable is that you can actually get that done. And then relevant is why it matters to you. And so when you think about your goals, follow this particular template, follow the SMART goals template. And one of the things we do here at Affluence is we realize that the world is smart, for lack of better words. There's almost no challenges that you face, you as in both you, the audience, as well as like you at a generic level. There's no challenges that anyone faces that has not been faced by somebody else before. And that's our goal behind all of this, which is how do we go and facilitate software and applications like Matrix to actually serve those needs. And so that's the point behind these templates that we've created and these AI infrastructure that we're building in order to help you leverage the knowledge base, not just from your team or your organization, but across all industries and across the entire global workforce or data knowledge. So one of the things that you want to consider then is make sure that when you set a goal using that goal creation system that I mentioned, you follow the SMART goal template. And so now I'm also going to send this to you. One of the things that you can do inside Matrix is actually when you go to one of these templates that we have, and if you go to this webpage, we actually have a lot of other templates, is that you can click on try this template now, and it'll create a Matrix project for you so you can read further and learn more about each of these in details. So that's the second aspect on how Matrix helps you achieve your goal. Because when was the last time, if you think about it, when was the last time you actually stepped back and determined the step you need to actually do something that's important, right? And what happens is that every single day we're just inundated so much by task and task and task and task, and sort of we do them without even thinking on how it actually matters. Just a reminder to all of you, Matrix helps you understand what are the things to not do. So learning to say no is actually extremely important. And so with the Matrix software, and going back to what the quadrants are all about, is that your goals are now so clear and well defined. And so when you have this task and with this matrix and you have 30 action items on them, 30 tasks on them, and you're going and you compare notes to other people, to your manager in particular, and to your direct reports, it is so easy to tell everyone what you think is important. And so when you think about your personal success, make sure that you are speaking clearly to everyone else what your priorities are. And that's why Product Matrix works so well. It's, at the end of the day, a communication tool to help you get clarity of mind on what really matters. So when I use Product Matrix, I actually have something like 300-ish projects, and those projects exist across the entire spectrum of all my initiatives, all my priorities, both personal and as well as organizational related priorities. And then from there, I can look at it and decide where I need to focus my time and where I need to focus my attention. The fact that I set due dates and reminders and so forth is really helpful, because what it does is it brings back the things that are actually critical, and it reminds me to actually tackle them. One way that Product Matrix actually helps you surface up tasks that are even more important is for you to explicitly tell the system that, hey, this is important. And we call that starring an item. So for example, let's just say, again, this task is in quadrant 1, right? But what I can also do is I can actually star it. And what starring does is it actually tells the system that this task is important. And so when we think about the weight, the total importance weight of any task or any project and so forth, we can look at the star as a way to determine that. And then not only that, you can actually have projects that are starred as well. So the way you want to star a project is you click on what's called the project details. And so you see here, click on edit project. And so what the item details has been replaced with the project details. And the project details is actually very similar to, well, it's a way for you to change the name of the project, of course, but also changing the name of the quadrants in order to better reflect how you think. So I showed you the do now, do later, delegate, postpone as sort of like the initial basis of Product Matrix, but at the same time, these are all customizable as well. So what that allows you to do is actually create templates and create standardized templates on how you like to think, because some people actually prefer quadrant 4 to signify something else and quadrant 3 to quantify something else. And so you're able to do that with Product Matrix. So I want to show you how to create a project, and it's actually very simple. You click on project here, and then you create project. And so when you create a project, you're able to choose from a blank project, which is sort of the standard way to do it. But at the same time, you can actually go to what we call the public templates. So these are template projects that we have, the domain knowledge that we've built over the years on what are some of the other templates that our customers can use that'll help them get started very quickly. So when you're exploring Product Matrix, check out some of these other various type of project that's available. And then from there, you can take these templates, modify them, and then save them as your own. So that's how you would create a project. And so if I were to choose blank project here, I can say, project name, project A. I can give it notes. I can invite others to this project as needed, or, of course, I can leave it for just myself. I can choose the color coding, and I create a project. And so that's very, very simple. And you can see how, I can build additional matrices very, very rapidly, and then have these matrices each capture different elements that I care about. And the color coding is actually pretty useful too. So I highly recommend that you use different colors, a way to signify, hey, these are, maybe this specific color scheme is my work. This specific color scheme is related to operations or marketing, etc. So if you have more and more areas of responsibilities, our color coding system actually is really helpful for that. So now going back to the challenges that we talked about, that customers face, the third thing that I mentioned was being overwhelmed by the source of data that you have, and but by overwhelmed by communication in general, because I probably get, I want to say, several hundred emails a day. And so from those several hundred emails, it's very, very difficult to actually go through all of them and be able to understand what is actually important, right? And so one of the things that we allow you to do with Product Matrix is helping tie all that together into one central place. So we probably have one of the most, well, probably the deepest integration into the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So we have something called Product Matrix for Outlook. So if you haven't done this already, make sure you do this. If you have Outlook, Microsoft 365 in particular, go and install our Outlook application. You go to the Add in App Store here, install Outlook integration. What Product Matrix for Outlook allows you to do is take emails and helping you prioritize them, flagging emails works great if you have 5 flags email. Doesn't work so great if you have 50 flag emails, because afterwards you're going to lose track really, really quickly. So when you get an email in Outlook, you can, once you install Party Matrix, you can click on this dot, dot, dot here and choose Party Matrix. And you see how the option to prioritize an email. So what that does is I can take an email and convert it into a Party Matrix task. And what's neat about this is I can choose what quadrant it belongs in, right? So for example, right here, my project A that I just created earlier, I can choose what quadrant it belongs in. And so you can see how I can quickly turn an email, right, that I have to respond into an appropriate task in the appropriate quadrant and set the due date as needed. And so I can capture an email just like that. And so now once I've created that that task from the email, this item details pops up. It's just like you saw in the web app. The only difference is now that I have that email prioritized, I can make sure that, you know, I can say due in 2 weeks and remind me daily. And so now I'm getting daily reminder to tackle this email as needed. And it's so easy for me to lose track of an email if I don't do something like this, especially for something that's really critical, especially if you're working with a very important customer or an external party and you want to ensure that everything is on track, especially if you can't respond to their email right away, but you want to make sure it's important and or you know that it's important, but you want to make sure that it's tracked, right? Because if you don't do this, then what happens? The next email from somebody else who's less important, or an email that is actually spam or whatever, becomes top of mind, because that's the last email that comes in, and you don't want that. You don't want last in, first out. You want the most important thing in, first out, right? And that's the goal in all of this. So Party Matrix allows you to take those few emails and prioritize them. The other thing you can do with Party Matrix 2 is actually you can go and you can add an email to an existing task. And this is actually also equally important, because one of the things that happens to all of us is that we'll get an email, we'll get a message, and in message in Teams, and guess what? You already have a task that's pending because someone is just asking for a status of it. And so with Party Matrix, one of the things we're able to let you do is actually become less overwhelmed by organizing it just a teeny bit better. So when I get an email from a customer or something like that, but I already have a task open for that customer and I need to assign to somebody else, what I'm able to do is actually open the same thing in Party Matrix. You saw how I opened this panel up, and I can attach the email to an existing task. Now, suddenly I can have a better understanding of how all of this fits together, that the most important emails are not dropped and they're properly prioritized and organized into the appropriate action items and the appropriate quadrants in the appropriate projects. So that's one of the things I highly recommend that you check out if you haven't already. A lot of customers come to Party Matrix because they are overwhelmed by emails. I mean, that's one of those things where it's the bane of our existence and there's nothing we can do about it. No matter how good all these other chat applications exist, emails is just the way we're communicating so much with external parties. And so Party Matrix gives you an ability to manage that a little bit better. So what I've shown you is I've shown you the email management. I've shown you how to manage tasks and personal priorities. I've shown you how to create goals. The other thing I'll show you is how it fits into your Microsoft Teams. If you do use Microsoft Teams, it is not required to use application. You saw how I actually just went to the web app here. If you go to affluence.com, click on web app, you're set. We also have desktop app that you can use. At the same time, you go to partymatrix.com. It's the same thing. You can use it on mobile, etc. But we also want to, minimize interruptions if possible. And so that's one of the reasons why we actually built probably the deepest integrations inside Microsoft Teams. If you go to Microsoft Teams, go to the App Store, search for Party Matrix. You can install it. It'll show up right here on the left panel. Just right-click on it and pin it. Once you pin it, Party Matrix just sort of stay right here. Now you can use Microsoft Teams and go to Party Matrix without even leaving the application. And you can see how when I open Party Matrix here, I get the same view. Actually, everything is synchronized together. So that task that I created inside this project, it's all here. I don't even have to go to any other software. And so I can see the task, I can see how it all fits together. I can go to this home view right here. This is called the home view. And it tells me what are the things I need to work on. What are the things that require my attention? And so Party Matrix can take all this information that you have and actually show you the agenda on the things that you should work on at any point in time. And in particular, you can go to my items here and you're able to see all the tasks that you have across everything, right? And so it's one central place to see the tasks that you have to do. But there's a couple things that we do really well too, which is we help you actually prioritize the communication that you have. So I do go into more details in other webinars, but Protomatrix also allows you to convert any conversation that you have with your teammates into tasks directly. And so it allows you to prioritize things as your manager is asking you or as your team members sending you messages and so forth. So then you, again, still have one central place to prioritize all your tasks. You see how I can go here and create Party Matrix action item directly from any conversation I have with anybody. So that's how we tackle the problems that we talked about, that I talked about with respect to understanding what's priorities right now, and then how do we tie it all together. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the webinar, I mean, the presentation here. And by the way, I do want to emphasize that if you have any questions, go ahead and bring them up right now. Or again, you can also send me a message to hi@affluence.com. And if there's anything that I'm missing or I can address in more details, I'd be happy to. So to summarize all of this, I want to say that it is now up to you. And when I say up to you, it means that, Protomatrix at the end of the day is just a software tool. And what that software tool does is it just help facilitate all of this, but you have to do the heavy lifting, right? So sign up for Protomatrix and use our application in Teams and Outlook if applicable, and then create 3 projects: the personal priorities project, the work priorities, and then the one AI generated matrix. So if you get those 3 in place, I think you'll get some clarity on how Protomatrix fits into the bigger picture. And then finally, when you are creating Protomatrix action item, make sure you set due dates and make sure you put them in the appropriate quadrants. And then also make sure that you go back to Protomatrix and make sure you don't drop them, right? When tasks are done, mark them as done. And my advice is ruthlessly prioritize. Can't say it enough. What happens is we are so inundated with tasks and emails and things to do, and we always have more things to do than the resources to do them. You have to ruthlessly prioritize, and all Protomatrix does is it helps you clarify your mind by helping you put the things you have to do into the appropriate quadrants, so it's very easy to understand. And when you look at it, you should know, this is where I should focus my time, right? And then hopefully those goals that you want to achieve, we're generating the appropriate task and ideas to help you get started, so then you can start working on those. So then you can get that promotion, you can get that raise, you can improve your organizational efficiency or improve communication. That goal system has unlimited potential in terms of what it can do for you. And so success with Protomatrix should look like this. 1, you have one central place to track all your priorities. I always use the word priorities as opposed to task. You probably don't want to use Protomatrix to track your shopping list. I mean, you can, but it's not the same. Protomatrix is about understanding what you need to work on and understanding what you shouldn't work on. And so I emphasize the word priorities for that reason. It shouldn't be about the little things. It's about the things that matter. And again, if you can identify one thing, if using Protomatrix, you can identify one thing that you no longer have to do, just think about how much time and effort we've just saved you, right? If you're an organization and you're finding that, hey, we can actually drop this entire project, right? Because it really doesn't really matter, then we've just saved you hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and countless man hours to actually get that done. So keep that in mind. So don't just do better project management for the sake of better project management. And then success also means that your important emails are prioritized and never forgotten. Make sure that you prioritize those key emails. I mean, I get so many emails that I always have to prioritize them, so then I get the appropriate reminders so I can go back and actually address them. And because of that, I'm able to make sure that the 5 or 10% of emails that truly matters are addressed, and then that you're actively deciding what not to do inside Protomatrix. So don't do the wrong things right. Do the right things right. And with that, I'm actually done here with my portion of the webinar. I'd be happy to take questions.